Howdy, of you delicious people. I'm here today to review the movie, the Netflix film called Outside the Wire. So, when watching this film, immediately the thing that kept popping into my brain was like, man, can Anthony Mackie just sell a film? When watching this movie, I'm like, yeah, you know what? I don't really care for this movie, but I'm just really like impressed with how like Anthony Mackie just really sticks out in this film and how interesting he makes this character, this robotic Ash-like character. I have seen Anthony Mackie in Altered Carbon season two, and ultimately I've seen him in Black Mirror. He has an episode in there, and ultimately as well as knowing him, of course, from being in 8 Mile or even maybe a movie called Avengers somewhere in there. Captain America, Winter Soldier. Maybe you've heard of him. Maybe you've heard of that guy named Falcon. Maybe you've heard of him. He's in the Ant Man films, I guess. Sure. So going into this movie, I thought that this movie like it wasn't that like I was sitting through this movie and I really didn't care about it, but ultimately Anthony Mackie was the most fascinating thing going on in this film, and I thought that that was the only real true interesting thing about this movie. Other than that, like waiting when to just see Anthony Mackie again was the only interesting thing about this film, but I think that there is good enough story. I think uh, Damson Idris, who ultimately plays Harper in this movie, I thought there was some interesting things about this character, but not good enough compared to Anthony Mackie. Because when Anthony Mackie's in a room, he like just immediately like everything gravitates to him, and so reasonably when you have Harper that is supposed to be the main focus in this film, like it's Anthony Mackie just steals the show. So what is this story ultimately about? So we ultimately have if I can pronounce the guy's name, Harper. We ultimately have Harper, who is a guy that otherwise usually just hits a switch and kills things. To ultimately we have and this is talking about this from a very cryptic like sense at first, and then we're gonna go into spoilers. So ultimately wait for that double five to otherwise hear spoilers. So this is a guy that usually just flips a switch and kills things, and ultimately that comes back. It eventually like goes to the point of him putting lives in jeopardy. And so he ultimately has to hit a button and kill things in a war zone that ultimately has maybe even on his side casualties. And so reasonably after that hitting of the button, ultimately he gets in trouble. He makes a mistake. He has to make a quick decision that even his superior won't let him ultimately make. So he makes that decision above his superior and lands him into hot water, where ultimately he ends up getting shipped off to basically Siberia, let's just say. But while doing that, Harper ends up teaming up with Leo and or Captain, which is ultimately Anthony Mackie's character, and they end up going on a delivery mission that I think there are some points in these scenes where I do like the action. I do like the kind of twists and turns that this story goes into, and reasonably I think that this movie is like just kind of good enough. Like if anybody have seen any number of any like Netflix films or stuff like that, like Extraction or any of the Chris Hemsworth movie Extraction, or maybe Six Underground that ultimately has Ryan Reynolds in it. Like I think people would just like the probably the simplicity of this movie, where it eventually towards the end has Anthony Mackie. It seems like he is going to be a very interesting character to eventually be part towards the end, let's just say, in a very cryptic way. Where Anthony Mackie's place towards the end of this movie, I thought was very interesting. So yeah, so I think that is all that I would probably go out of my way to say about this film. There really is like to me there is a lot of like slow time within this movie, uh because reasonably it's just kind of people waiting things out ultimately to try to get to certain people and take them out and stuff like that. So it's really just a lot of people are just kind of standing around waiting for their shot to happen and stuff like that. And uh there are some interesting moments that we get with Anthony Mackie, and there is some interesting kind of dialogue between Anthony and Harper and the Harper character, Ibris or Idris, and like I thought if anything that was the most fascinating things to ultimately see Harper's character almost being like a cold, calculating, heartless person, kind of mixed in with Anthony Mackie's character, which is ultimately a machine. So let's go into spoilers about this because at the end of the day, that's all I want to say about this movie. Because if anything else, I would probably just be spoiling this movie because it looks like it's about around that time again to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about probably about that time to ultimately say that you'd go out of your way. It's bleep 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 bleep. It's about that time, folks. Spoiler time. So reasonably, yeah, this movie is like to me, it's kind of like a I would call this maybe like a movie they can put on in the background. Like there's some interesting dialogue going on, but the only interesting part is maybe towards the end of the film, and that part is quasi like confusing, or there's sometimes where some stuff gets jumbled around, just because there is like it gets to the point to where you're kind of not being able to figure out which side Anthony Mackie is on, and so reasonably spoilers. So we have it to where ultimately there are military characters in on the ground, ultimately fighting out this war with these drones. But we also eventually will find out that there's more than just these robotic drones and stuff like that. To me, the normal military esh like drones. But anyways, so we get it to where this military operation is really just they're pinned down. There is ultimately two guys that otherwise are stuck between fire, and one of the military officers can't get to him. So it's basically just we have a guy that is that has a drone, a giant drone that ultimately can shoot out a rocket, and he is noticing via satellite that, or via this drone, that there is going to be there's going to be a RPG coming in, and so reasonably he has to make a decision to take out this rocket, which will also take out these two other military guys, or wait this whole thing out and see if the military force can get to these guys, which ultimately could kill every single military force that is on Harper's side, because ultimately Harper is having his hand on this trigger. So the ultimate avatar Harper is asking his superior to, hey, like, I have this going on. Do you want me to take the shot? And the military force that's on the ground that says negative, like, I want to get my men out. If anything, like, no, we're not going to leave a man behind. So the superior of Harper says no, like, don't take the shot. And they're just waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And Harper takes the shot regardless, defying his superior, defying the army official that is on the ground, and he just takes the shot anyways. You ultimately have it to where this guy is to be taken to be transferred. At some point, they were almost going to like court-martial him, and they were going to like even we have it to where Eckhart, who ultimately had mentioned it's like, you killed 2 Marines, you should have went to jail. Eckhart is the military officer that Harper meets when he gets to this new base. So you ultimately have it to where Harper doesn't have field experience, so he needs to have some. And so reasonably, that's why he ultimately is getting transferred, so that way he has some kind of real human connection with what he is doing. So that way he doesn't ever again pull a trigger on somebody and kill his own men. So we ultimately have Eckhart, who is welcoming Harper into this establishment and basically mentioning about Leo and or Anthony Mackie's character, and ultimately telling him like, hey, he's not like us. So recently I thought Eckhart was like really interesting. I've seen him in the movie Defendor, and I'm like, God, and I think I saw him on also Black Mirror, I think. I really like Michael Kelly. Like, he is just really just a fascinating actor, and everything that he picks, I'm just like, God, I really enjoy whatever he does. And I wish that he would do even more things, because I really enjoy his delivery. But moving on, so we have Harper, who ultimately goes into meeting meeting Anthony Mackie. He delivers him his drive, his and to ultimately have Anthony Mackie get all this information on Harper. But Anthony Mackie already knows all the information of Harper, so he doesn't need that information. So we have a tour. Eventually, they push on to have Anthony Mackie go on a mission with Harper. And so you ultimately have it to where we have Anthony ultimately just take his shirt off, and we see every little bit of tech that Anthony Mackie has, and Harper is just godsmacked. It's like, huh? You're what? And Leo ultimately, or Captain ultimately says it's like you need to wipe that bewildered look out of off your face. Like, yeah, so I'm an AI. So what? Like, do you trust me? And Harper's like, and Captain's like, no, do you trust me? And so Harper's like, yes. It's like, okay, like, so you and me mission. So really the mission is to deliver these vaccines, and so reasonably we have it to where they go off, and they are yet again to be tied with the same exact official that was on the grounds that ultimately had his two men get killed by Harper. Even to where the point where Harper is being reconnected with these guys, and they beat the living crap out of him because ultimately he had been responsible for killing two men. And so Captain has to step in and to ultimately interject between these people. It's like, excuse me, it's uh, like, uh, is there anything that I need to interrupt here? Is like, what's going on? So we ultimately are forced with these guys to work with one another. And so eventually we push on to have them get into a shootout. And reasonably, we have it to where Harper doesn't really have a gun right now, but eventually he'll get one. So uh, we go on to here, and ultimately the military officer that is ultimately going to be Captain and Harper's guard is ultimately telling them, it's like, hey guys, like, go ahead and we'll cover you. Go ahead and you guys deliver that vaccine. So they get to deliver this vaccine, and ultimately we find out that eventually it seems that Captain is almost pulling a Denzel Washington Training Day thing. Almost kind of like a little bit more and more trying to brainwash Harper into trusting him, to the point of asking him about his woman at home, and like also just kind of like asking little bits of information of him, I think, to really just brainwash him, to ultimately just get him to trust him even more. Like getting Harper to divulge information about himself to make him to make Captain's character seem more human. So we have Harper that is eventually going to be going further on into this mission and realize actually how much like heavily deep he's in, deep water. Uh, how reasonably this wasn't exactly a mission that he should not have been doing. Because when looking at it, like, he is kind of doing something outside his orders, outside of his job, and Anthony Mackie is just like, well, like, if anything, you're going to have to like follow me. You're going to have to do what I say because I'm your superior, and and we have it to where Harper is just like, no, like, this is not my job. Like, these are not my orders. And but eventually we have it to where at some point they go off the grid anyways, and we have it to where Anthony Mackie needs to have Carter take out what we are to believe is a tracker. So Harper takes out Captain's tracker, and so they end up going further on into doing this mission, and ultimately we find out that Captain's character is actually a, like, I would call him like a Red Hood character, like a DC comic books Red Hood character that ultimately is playing both sides of the war against one another. Like, he's basically like a double agent or a triple agent or whatever, where he's just out for his own, and he's ultimately just kind of wanting to have both of these people destroy one another and then collect the pieces afterwards. Ultimately uh, that's ultimately Captain's motivation, and ultimately the orders that he had been given, he had manipulated them and kind of twist and turn them so much to where ultimately he could make up his own objectives. And so Captain ends up going and playing both sides and basically killing all of both sides. And so we end up finding out that Harper is under such deep water or that basically he has to call Captain in. He has to go to his superiors over Captain's head and ultimately tell him it's like, yeah, like this guy is not doing what he was originally ordered, and he's full on like causing chaos, and this is awful. This is horrible. What are we going to do about it? And to ultimately, we have it to where Miller and Eckhart are ultimately just like, well, we can take him down. We can pull his failsafe, and ultimately, if he were to ever just kind of get out of line, we could put him back by hitting this failsafe. Well, Harper took out Captain's failsafe. The tracker. The tracker was actually a failsafe. And so basically, Harper is effed. Harper effed everybody because reasonably, they eventually tracked where they were, and that was in a place where, of course, they should not be. So they just decided to send a strike out there and wipe them out, because really they were in a place that they should not have been, and so Eckhart took them out because they were disobeying orders, and they ultimately realized that the thing that they took out wasn't anybody. So we ultimately have it to where Captain chose Harper because Harper was as much a machine as Captain was. Like ultimately mentioning like before when Captain would be mentioning how cold blooded that Harper is, and that ultimately like everything is just a flip of the switch to him and nothing really mattered. Hence why he chose him for this mission, because he's the perfect person for this mission, because he doesn't care. Harper doesn't actually really care. But then when realizing how far down the rabbit hole, or how far down a river of that Harper is in, then basically he's like, yeah, I guess I should do what's right. So we eventually have it to where Harper himself has to go after and take down Captain, because ultimately they need to find him. And Captain is ultimately taking out all the opposition and decking out everybody. So we ultimately have it to where Harper takes out Captain. And I think this part is the most interesting thing about this movie, is the fight out between human and robot. And there were some interesting points where ultimately Anthony would ultimately get injured or get a shot, and ultimately he would have to put on some like liquid skin, I think, or some super glue of sorts, to just keep on chugging. And when we eventually have Harper, who completely just annihilates Captain's body, how we kind of just see this like this disheveled like machine mass or whatever. Like I thought that was really interesting, just the visual alone. So we ultimately have it to where, yeah, Harper did mess up before, but really when looking at it, he made up for it by doing this mission. And recently after Harper takes Captain out, basically he no longer needs to be doing this job anymore. It's like, okay, we're just gonna send you back. Like, see you later. Like yeah, you did well beyond your call of duty, and yeah, hey, thanks, that was great and all, but like yeah, go back and do your job now. Like, I thought that was the most interesting thing, was just the fact that it's like, man, just one mission alone just had this guy just be like, nah, okay, well, all's forgiven. All's forgiven. So yeah, I think that's all I really wanted to say about this movie. I kind of rushed through it a lot, but when looking at it, who knows? It's either people will watch this movie or they won't. It kind of like really just depends on if you're an Anthony Mackie fan or not, and it really just depends on whether you just kind of enjoy this kind of movie. I thought it was really, like, I think they really had to have some kind of hook in this film, and so having Captain be a robot was, I just guess, good enough. I thought reasonably, it's kind of a silly movie, but I liked the whole like drone, and like it's a future technology of war. I thought that was just kind of fascinating about it. Was just like, oh, okay, well, hey, like we're gonna use some CGI stuff, and we're ultimately going to. And I like the part where ultimately you had like two of the army guys that ultimately were smacking the robot or the drone, and we have it to where like Captain goes to the defense of the robot to ultimately like, well, hey, would you like it if I just like took a rifle to your face, kind of thing. And I thought that was really interesting. I thought that like an AI protecting an AI that can't like speak up. Um, I thought that that was really interesting. But anyways, there's not much to really talk about within this film. There isn't much to mention because reasonably it's really just, most of the point is shooty shooty bang bang. That's really all what's going on in this film. So I think with that, I think we're gonna call this one a wrap. Yeah, I wish that I had more to talk about in this one. But it was like, to me, it was just like, meh. Like, I was just like, I thought that this movie was just another Netflix movie that was just good enough. It didn't have to be more than that, just good enough. So, if anyways, I'm going to be good enough to say that this is a good enough review, I'm going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.